For more on these latest developments, let's bring in the former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for European and NATO Policy, Jim Townsend. Jim, thanks for taking the time to speak to us. I mean, what are your thoughts on these talks? As we just heard there from Reza, Pakistan says it's moving ahead. Donald Trump said U.S. negotiators are planning on heading that way. But Iran says Tehran has no plans to attend any talks with the U.S. Is there any way these talks will be happening tomorrow?
Well, this is very frustrating, and I think it's something that we've seen before. It seems that there's an end game that's played right before talks begin, where both the U.S. And Iran come up with problems why they're not going to show up, and they blame the other. So, in a sense, we've seen this before. This seems to be a tactic. It seems that things have tightened up in terms of Tehran. I think your report was very good along those lines. So we'll just have to see. My understanding is the president does want talks to proceed. But we've had, of course, the tanker incident that's happened over the past 48 hours, as well as Iranian attacks a couple of days ago against two ships. So the ceasefire, though, is the worry right now. It's supposed to expire on Wednesday. So we'll have to see. But this is something that frustrates everyone, and it makes it so hard to get to grips with opening up the straits.
Do you think there would have been a greater chance of these talks taking place if the U.S. had not seized the Iranian flag cargo vessel?
Well, that's a great question. This seems to be tactics that they employ, and the U.S. does too. But the Iranians particularly deploy these tactics to ratchet up pressure and to use as leverage. So they would have looked for another reason to make things difficult, I think. But taking that tanker, I think it just gave them an excuse to hold things up and to be obstructionist. And I'm not sure what we gained, except to show that we're tough and that we're going to, keep this blockade going. And that doesn't necessarily help things either.
Right. And in the meantime, Iran is saying that it is set to respond soon to what it has called an act of piracy on the part of the U.S. What kind of response might that be?
Well, I think we're seeing part of it right now with saying, well, we're not going to go to these talks. You want them, you need them more than we do. Look what you've done. And so we're not going to go to these talks. And so I think that's part of their response. I don't think they're going to escalate anything right now. I think the response we're going to see more in terms of tactics. And if we do sit at the table, maybe we'll see some retaliation there in terms of demands that they might make. But I don't think we're going to see a military escalation on behalf of Iran.
And is that in regard to the Strait of Hormuz as well? I mean, how do you think President Trump might act there? Will he retreat or will he escalate when it comes to the strait?
Well, he has been threatening Iran, as you know, over the past 12 hours, I think, in terms of these tweets that he's going to bomb bridges and do all these kinds of things. So, the ball is in his court in a lot of ways right now. What can he do to increase the pressure on Iran to show up and not make things worse? So he could think that the tool he's going to use is military leverage, and he's going to go destroy bridges and this type of thing, thinking that this will get Iran to the table. That's a risky tactic, because a lot of what that kind of provokes with Iran is further obstruction and further digging in their heels, and maybe escalation on their end. So I think it's going to have to be mediators like Pakistan or others working behind the scenes that get Iran to the table. I don't think it's going to be the U.S. doing it using bombs and this type of thing. I think we're going to depend on Pakistan and others to get them to the table, maybe even China. To get them to the table to begin these talks.
Right. But once they do get to the table, if they do get to the table, there are a lot of red lines that both sides are demanding that it doesn't seem there's any wiggle room on either side. For example, I'm thinking of the nuclear issue in particular. Even if they do get to the table, then what's the likelihood that they'll come to some kind of agreement?
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, it's hard enough getting them to the table. Once we're there, then the real hard work has to continue. I do know that there's been papers and discussions with intermediaries behind the scenes for a while. So I think there has been some framework agreed in terms of a way ahead, dealing with the nuclear issue particularly. What is acceptable, what is not. So I think they've come to some detail on that issue. I don't think that means they're going to be close to agreeing to anything, but I think they've agreed to an approach on how to talk about it, which, believe it or not, in negotiations can be half the battle. But you're right. That's number one in terms of issues, and then number two, of course, are the straits and how they're going to come up with an agreement that keeps the straits open and freedom of navigation, and not vulnerable to Iran at a whim closing the straits down, and we finding ourselves right back to where we are. The final point, though, to make is we need to extend the ceasefire. That's got to be something that comes out of these talks, if they sit down at the table, is extending the ceasefire another couple of weeks so we can continue to work and make some progress and not make things worse by escalating military back and forth against each other.
Right, indeed, as that ceasefire is set to expire this week. Jim Townsend, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us.
You're welcome.
Well, as we were mentioning there a moment ago with Jim, we are less than 48 hours before the end of that ceasefire. There are still many disagreements between the U.S. and Iran, and one of the main ones is Iran's nuclear program. Washington is demanding a complete end to it, which Tehran refuses. Charlie James takes a closer look.
Peace talks hanging on by a thread as Tehran and Washington face stark disagreements over the future of Iran's nuclear program. According to the U.S. president, a permanent peace agreement is very close, and Iran has agreed to hand over its enriched uranium.
Very important is that Iran does not have a nuclear weapon, and they've agreed to that. Iran's agreed to that, and they've agreed to it very powerfully. They've agreed to give us back the nuclear dust that's way underground because of the attack we made with the B-2 bombers.
But Tehran is telling a very different story. The regime denies seeking to acquire an atomic bomb at all and continues to defend its right to civilian nuclear energy.
They are trying through bullying to deny the rights of a nation, of a society. They say they have decided that you must not exercise this right. Why? For what crime? Who are you to decide?
According to the International Atomic Energy Agency, Iran rapidly increased its stockpile of highly enriched uranium in recent years. Before the U.S. strikes on nuclear facilities in June 2025, Iran had enriched more than 440 kilograms of uranium up to 60% purity, a short step from weapons-grade 90% enriched uranium. And even after the past 5 weeks of U.S. and Israeli bombing, experts believe Iran still has most of the tools it needs to make a nuclear bomb.
Under no circumstances will Iran's enriched uranium be transferred anywhere. Just as Iran's soil is important and sacred to us, this matter is also important to us.
U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance blamed the failure of the last round of negotiations on Iran's refusal to abandon its nuclear weapons program. And at least publicly, neither side's red lines have moved. The current 2-week ceasefire is set to expire on Wednesday.